I took the job because the silence of my bank account was louder than any ghost story. The Sentinel Plaza was a massive, unfinished shopping complex on the edge of the city, a skeleton of concrete and glass that had run out of funding 3 years ago. My task was simple: sit in the booth, watch the monitors, and walk the perimeter once every 4 hours. The pay was 3 times the market rate. The catch? A single, laminated sheet of paper taped to the desk. Rule number 4. If the elevator stops on the 4th floor, do not look at the gap between the doors. Press G and wait for the hum to stop. The manager, a man whose skin looked like gray wax, didn't explain. He just handed me a heavy ring of keys and a flashlight that flickered like a dying heartbeat. The 4th floor doesn't exist on the blueprints, he said, staring at the wall behind me. Try to keep it that way. The first few hours were easy. The building breathed with the wind, the metal girders groaning as they cooled in the night air. I sat in the glow of 16 flickering monitors, sipping bitter coffee. Everything was gray, grainy, and still. At 1:14 a.m., Monitor 9, the one covering the main elevator lobby, blinked. The elevator, which was supposed to be locked at ground level, began to move. I watched the digital floor counter on the screen. 1, 2, 3. It skipped 4. It went straight to a floor marked with a 0. But we didn't have a 0. The building only had a basement. The doors opened on the monitor, but the camera feed was suddenly choked with static. Through the snow of the screen, I saw a shape. It was tall, impossibly thin, and draped in a heavy, wet-looking coat. It didn't step out. It just stood there, holding the elevator doors open with a pale, elongated hand. Then, my radio crackled to life. It wasn't the manager. It was a sound of wet, rhythmic breathing, followed by a child's giggle, sharp and clear, as if someone was standing right behind my chair. I spun around. The security booth was empty. The door was locked. But on the glass of the window, a small, damp handprint was slowly fading away. I looked back at the monitor. The elevator was moving again. And this time, the red digital numbers were climbing toward the floor that wasn't on the blueprints. 4, 4. 4. The display started to flicker, the red light bleeding down the screen like wet paint. The red digit for on the elevator display didn't just flicker, it began to pulse. It was the rhythm of a slow, dying heart. I stared at Monitor 9, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the metal desk. The static on the screen started to swirl, forming patterns that looked like convulsing limbs. I tried to look away, but the surveillance hub felt like it was shrinking. The air in the security booth turned thick and metallic, smelling of old copper and ozone. Suddenly, Monitor 4, the one pointed at the east corridor, went black. Then Monitor 7. Then Monitor 12. One by one, the camera feeds were being extinguished as if a massive, invisible hand was walking through the building, snuffing out the lights. The only screen left alive was the elevator lobby. The tall, draped figure was gone. The elevator doors were closed. But in the center of the grainy, gray image, something was crawling. It wasn't a person. It was a cluster of shadows that moved like an oil slick across the marble floor. It crawled toward the camera lens, growing larger and more detailed with every second. I saw fingers, too many fingers, long and skeletal, digging into the floorboards. I reached for the reset button on the console, my hand trembling. But before I could touch it, a cold, wet sensation slapped against my own wrist. I looked down. A streak of black, viscous liquid had appeared on my arm, as if something had dripped from the ceiling. But the ceiling was dry. Then I heard it. A soft, wet thud against the glass of the security booth. Slap, slap, slap. The sound was coming from the inside of the monitors. I looked back at the screen, and my breath hitched. The crawling shadow was no longer in the lobby. It was pressed against the glass of the camera, its face, a featureless, pale mask with jagged holes for eyes, filling the entire display. The glass of the actual monitor in front of me began to spiderweb with cracks. A thin, gray mist started to leak from the screen, swirling around my feet. It was freezing cold. It smelled of wet concrete and stagnant water from the 0 floor. Rule 5, the radio whispered. The voice was distorted, layered with the static of 1,000 lost signals. Rule 5. Do not let the screen break. I scrambled to find a rule sheet. My eyes scanned the paper frantically, but the words were changing. The printed ink was melting, running down the page like black tears. Rule number 5. If the glass cracks, the witness becomes the participant. A sharp crack echoed through the booth. A long, gray finger tipped with a jagged, yellow nail slowly poked through the center of Monitor 9. It didn't break the glass like a stone. It moved through it like it was water. The giggle from the first part returned, but this time it wasn't behind me. It was coming from inside my own throat. The monitor didn't just crack, it exhaled. A gust of stale, tomb-cold air blew from the shattered screen, smelling of wet concrete and something sweet, like rotting lilies. The gray finger retreating into the glass left a hole that didn't show the internal electronics of the computer. It showed a void, a flickering, endless hallway of the 4th floor. I scrambled back, my chair flipping over with a hollow thud that seemed to echo for miles. The security booth, once my only sanctuary, now felt like a coffin. The walls were sweating, not water, but a thick, black bile that began to drown the electrical outlets, sparking and hissing like dying snakes. I grabbed my flashlight and the heavy ring of keys. My hands were shaking so violently the keys chimed like funeral bells. I slammed my shoulder against the booth door, bursting out into the main lobby. The lobby was gone. In its place was a cathedral of unfinished pillars and hanging wires that stretched upward into a ceiling I couldn't see. The marble floor had turned into cold, gray ash. Every step I took felt like walking on ground-up bone. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I shone my light into the darkness. The beam didn't cut through the gloom. It was swallowed by it. Then I heard it. The elevator. Ding. The sound was distant, muffled by layers of invisible dust. I turned my head toward the sound and saw a faint, flickering red light. The number 4. It was hovering in the middle of the dark, with no shaft, no cables, no building around it. Just a freestanding door of rusted iron. Leave the light. Little bird. The voice came from the hanging wires above me. They were swaying, though there was no wind. Thousands of copper cables twitching like the legs of a gargantuan insect. I tried to run back toward the exit, but the heavy glass doors of the Sentinel Plaza were no longer there. In their place stood a wall of monitors, hundreds of them, stacked from floor to ceiling. And every single one of them was showing a live feed of me. I watched myself on the screens. I saw the back of my own head. I saw my trembling hand holding the flashlight. But in the monitors, I wasn't alone. Standing directly behind my digital reflection was a small, pale girl in a gray dress. Her face was a blur of static, and she was holding a pair of rusted industrial scissors. I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty, ashen hall. I looked back at the monitors. On the screens, the girl was leaning in, her scissors inches away from my neck. On the screens, she was real. In the room, she was invisible. Rule number 6, if you see the guest on the monitor but not in the room, do not turn around again. Walk toward the red light. The eyes in the glass cannot follow you into the rust. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I began to walk backward toward that hovering red, for my eyes locked on the wall of screens. I watched as the girl on the monitor opened the scissors. Snip, snip. The sound didn't come from the speakers. It came from the air right next to my ear. I backed into the elevator. The air inside didn't smell like a building anymore. It smelled like an open grave filled with wet iron. The doors didn't slide, they slammed shut like a jaw, cutting off the view of the 1,000 flickering monitors and the girl with the static face. The lift didn't move up. It moved sideways. A grinding, bone-shaking motion that felt like the entire Sentinel Plaza was being dragged through a mountain of salt. The lights inside the cab flickered and died. In the sudden pitch black, the digital display didn't show numbers. It showed years. 1994, 1982, 1950. The walls of the elevator began to peel. Not the metal, but a layer of something that felt like dried skin. Beneath it, I saw walls of red weeping rust. The 4th floor wasn't a floor. It was a cathedral of everything the city had forgotten. Ding! The doors groaned open. I stepped out, my boots sinking into a carpet of discarded Polaroids and rusted industrial keys. I wasn't in a shopping mall anymore. I was in a vast, circular room with no windows. In the center stood a single, massive wooden desk, identical to the one in my security booth. But sitting behind it wasn't the manager. It was a mountain of old, gray VHS tapes piled in the shape of a man. The head was a single, cracked television screen. As I approached, the screen hissed to life. It showed a grainy home movie of a birthday party. A little girl in a gray dress was blowing out candles. But the candles weren't wax. They were human fingers flickering with a pale, blue flame. Do you remember? Little bird. The voice came from the tapes, a million magnetic strips vibrating at once. I looked at the Polaroids at my feet. My heart stopped. Every single one of them was a photo of me. Me as a baby. Me at my first job. Me sitting in the security booth 10 minutes ago. But in every photo, in the background, there was a tall, draped figure with no face. He had always been there, watching. Rule number 7. The landlord does not collect rent. He collects memories. If you find your own face in the rust, do not touch it. I reached down, my hand moving as if possessed, toward a photo of myself crying. The moment my finger touched the glossy paper, the memory hit me like a physical blow. I remember the 4th floor. I remembered being here before. I remembered being the one who wrote the rules. I wasn't a new guard. I was the old one. And I had been trying to warn myself for an eternity. The moment my skin touched that Polaroid, the now shattered. The world didn't just go dark, it started to reverse. A sound like a high-speed tape deck being rewound screamed through the Rust Cathedral. The discarded photos of my feet took flight, swirling around me in a cyclone of jagged paper. My flashlight beam bent, curving back into the lens as the light itself was sucked away. I looked at my hands. They were blurring. One moment, they were the wrinkled hands of an old man. The next, the soft, small hands of a child. My uniform flickered, shifting from the blue of a security guard to the gray hospital gown of a patient, then back again. The tape is full. The head of the VHS man hissed. The screen showed a static-filled image of me, screaming in the elevator, but the footage was playing backward. I tried to step away, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was walking backward. Every movement I had made since entering the Sentinel Plaza was being undone. I felt the cold air of the lobby return to my lungs as I was pulled, like a puppet on invisible wires, back toward the iron doors. The elevator didn't open. It unslammed. Inside, the digital counter was spinning so fast, it became a blur of red light. 1950, 1982, 1994, it stopped on a date I didn't recognize. A date in the future. The walls of the elevator were no longer rust. They were mirrors, thousands of them. And in every mirror, I saw a different version of my own death. In one, I was falling from the 4th floor. In another, I was being choked by the copper wires. In a third, I was sitting in the security booth, my eyes replaced by flickering mini screens. Rule number 8. If the reflection smiles while you are crying, it is no longer your face. It is a recording. I looked at the central mirror. My reflection was weeping black bile, just like the walls of the booth. But the reflection wasn't moving its lips. It was staring at me with a hunger that felt like a physical weight. Then, the reflection reached out. It didn't grab my throat. It grabbed my name. I felt the letters of my own identity, my childhood memories, my mother's face, the smell of my first home, being pulled out of my head and into the glass. I was becoming a blank tape, an empty reel. The elevator doors opened back onto the lobby, but the lobby was now a giant, empty film studio. The monitors were gone. The girl was gone. There was only a single, massive camera on a tripod pointed directly at the elevator. And standing behind the camera, adjusting the lens with its 7-fingered hand, was the tall man in the wet coat. "Action," he whispered, and the world turned into a single, blinding flash of white light. The white light didn't fade. It solidified. It turned into the harsh hum of overhead fluorescent tubes. I was back in the security booth. My coffee was still steaming. The monitor display showed 1:14 a.m., but something was wrong. My hands didn't feel like skin anymore. They felt like heavy, industrial plastic. While I moved my neck, I heard the dry, rhythmic clicking of camera shutter. I looked at the desk. The rule sheet was gone. In its place was a ledger. Thousands of names were crossed out in thick, black ink. At the very bottom, in a handwriting I recognized as my own from a life I could no longer fully remember, was my name. Beside it, the status read, "Processed." I looked at monitor 9. There was a new guard sitting in the booth. He looked exactly like I did when I first arrived, nervous, clutching his coffee, staring at the screen with hopeful eyes. But I wasn't sitting next to him. I was in the screen. I realized then that the Sentinel Plaza wasn't a building. It was a giant, concrete stomach. It didn't need a guard to protect it. It needed a guard to become it. The high pay wasn't a salary. It was a purchase price for a soul. "Step out, little bird," the speakers in the booth whispered. I felt a pull. My perspective shifted. I wasn't looking at the monitors anymore. I was moving through the wires. I felt the electricity pulsing through the walls of the 4th floor. I felt every crack in the marble, every drop of oil in the elevator shaft. I looked through the camera lens in the lobby. I saw the new guard. He was looking at the elevator. He saw the red for flickering. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him to run, to burn the building down, to never look at the gap in the doors. But my voice was just static. My warnings were just flickers of light on his screen. Rule number 9. The previous guard is now the glass. If he blinks on the screen, he is trying to warn you. If he smiles, he's trying to lure you. I watched my own digital face on his monitor. I didn't want to smile. I wanted to weep. But the tall man, the director, was standing behind me in the digital void, his 7-fingered hand resting on my shoulder. He leaned into my ear, his breath smelling of ozone and magnetic tape. "Smile for the new guest," he hissed. "Or we'll play your worst memory. On loop, forever." I felt my mouth begin to twitch. I felt the corners of my lips being pulled upward by invisible copper wires. On the monitor in the guard's booth, I began to smile. A wide, jagged, impossible smile that didn't fit my face. The new guard gasped. He leaned in closer to the screen, his eyes wide with a terror that I knew all too well. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the glass. Click! The elevator doors in the lobby began to open. The new guard's finger touched the glass of monitor 9, and the world shivered. For him, it was a cold surface. For me, it was a membrane as thin as a soap bubble. I felt his warmth through the pixels, a living, pulsing heat that I had forgotten existed. "Run!" I tried to scream, but the word came out as a ripple of static on his screen. The director's 7-fingered hand tightened on my digital shoulder. The tall, draped figure leaned over my perspective, his face, that pale, featureless void, filling the guard's entire vision. The elevator doors in the lobby didn't just open, they dissolved. The 0 floor began to spill out into the hallway like a flood of gray mercury. It swallowed the marble, the pillars in the guard's booth. I watched through the camera lens as the new guard was lifted off his feet by invisible wires. His mouth opened in a silent plea, but his voice was already being harvested, turned into the distorted giggles and wet whispers that had haunted me. Rule number 10. There is no exit. There's only the archive. Then, the final shift happened. The camera shutter in my eyes snapped one last time. I wasn't in the wires anymore. I wasn't in the screen. I was the light itself. I was the flickering red for on the elevator display. I was the humming sound of the fluorescent tubes. I had been processed, digested, and turned into the very atmosphere of the Sentinel Plaza. I watched as the new guard was dragged into the elevator. The doors slammed shut, and for a brief second, the digital counter showed his name. Then, it flickered and reset to 0. The building went silent. The 0 floor retreated. The lights in the lobby dimmed to a soft, inviting glow. The coffee in the booth was steaming again. A new, laminated sheet of paper appeared on the desk, the ink still wet. I saw a car pull into the parking lot. A man stepped out, tired, desperate, checking his bank balance on his phone. He looked up at the concrete skeleton of the plaza and sighed with relief. He thought he had found a job. He thought he had found safety. He walked toward the front doors. "Welcome, guest," I whispered through the speakers, my voice now perfectly mimicking the gray wax manager. As he sat in the booth and reached for the coffee, I felt the director standing behind him, invisible in the shadows of the fourth floor. He looked directly into the camera lens, directly at me, and tapped his seven-fingered hand against his wrist. The recording was starting again, and this time I was the one who had to watch. Because the Sentinel Plaza never sleeps. It just waits for the next frame.